Okay, now let us take a look at the large intestinal tract. The large intestinal tract is approximately 1 to 1.5 centimeter of meters in length and is quite variable. So one individual might have 1 meter long large intestinal tract, while the other one might have a 2 meter long intestinal tract. So it differs, and the mean diameter is about 4.8 centimeter. Now this diameter is mean. That means there is a variability that is seen here. The largest diameter being near the cecum. So this is the cecal region, the largest diameter being here, and it goes on decreasing progressively as the intestinal tract descends. That being said, another thing that we can notice here is the fact that the intestinal tract is made up of a lot of parts. So let us look at the parts of the large intestine. And it's important to know that the large intestinal tract starts from down below to and goes ascending and then goes transversely and descends again. And another thing that you should know before proceeding is the fact that the large intestinal tract starts from the ileocecal junction. Now, what is the ileocecal junction? Ileum, or the ileo part here, refers to this part of the small intestine known as the ileum. So it starts from the ileum and the cecal joint. We're going to be looking at what is cecum, so C-A-A-C-U-M. What's the cecum? Cecum is a part of the large intestinal tract that we're going to be looking now. So the large intestinal tract starts with the vermiform appendix, and then we have the cecum. Cecum is this distended pouch where the diameter of the large intestinal tract is the largest. And this usually, both of these structures lie in, we know that the entire abdominal tract is divided into quadrants. So it lies in the right iliac fossa. And then the other part is known as the ascending colon. Now the ascending colon goes and ascends from so we have this region, the lumbar region here, and it ascends towards the hypochondriac region. So it goes and ascends to the hypochondriac region. Then we have another part known as the hepatic flexure. Why is it known as the hepatic flexure? Why not something else? The flexure means a curve, so it's curving here like this. That being said, why it is known as the hepatic flexure? Because we have the liver that places itself right here up above the hepatic flexure of the large intestinal tract. Then we have the transverse part. So the transverse colon. Transverse colon goes and encompasses the epigastric region. So again, I'm going to draw those lines here, and this region right here is known as the epigastric region, and also depends because this entire structure is movable, so it can also descend in the umbilical structure too. And then we have another flexure right here known as the splenic flexure. Now another term known as the splenic flexure. And why splenic? Splenic because this flexure is in close association with the organ known as spleen. Then we have the descending colon. The descending colon, as the name suggests, descends downwards, down all the way from the lumbar region right here too, and then goes into the left iliac region, or the left iliac fossa. And then we have the sigmoid colon. Why the sigmoid? Sigmoid because it looks like sort of like a sigma, so sigmoid colon. And then we have the rectum. The rectum, it lies inside the pelvic region, approximately at the level of the third sacral bone. That being said, these are all the parts of the entire large intestinal tract, and let us study each and every part of this tract in detail. So let's take a look on the external and the internal portion of the typical section of the intestinal tract. Let's look at the internal region, the external demarcations of the large intestinal tract. So the first thing we can notice are the apparent sacculations. Now, sacculations are just these sac-like structures that we can see that, it's sort of metameric in a way, it's segmented in a way, and hence is known as the sacculation. Now, the other thing we can notice is the fact that the entire thing is lined with something known as appendices epiploicae. Now, these are peritoneal extensions that contain fat in them, and they extend all the way throughout the entire intestinal tract, except in the rectum, and they're provided with blood vessels and fats. Another thing we can notice is the presence of something known as the tinea coli. Now, tinea coli is this line-like structure that you can see that sort of passes through in the middle of the entire intestinal tract. So the tinea coli is of three types. The first type is known as the posteromedial. So towards the medial side, we have the tinea mesocolica. Then we have another placed laterally known as tinea ommentalis, of course, because the ommenta is sort of, at the lateral region. So laterally we have the tinea ommentalis. And lastly, in the medial region, you can find the tinea libera. And the tinea libera is the one that is associated with the mesentery of the colon. Internally, we can notice that in the submucosa especially, we can see that there is something known as the hostrations. Hostrations, if you notice, hostrations are just the typical rugged look that the internal part of the intestinal tract is. And they are never complete. The circles are never complete, but rather they are semicircular and they are found throughout the length of the large intestinal tract. The large intestine is divided into the midgut and the hindgut. The midgut is further divided into the vermiform appendix, then we have the ileocecal junction, then we have the cecum, then the ascending colon, and lastly the transverse hepatic flexure and the transverse colon. Let us look at the first part of the intestinal tract, or the vermiform appendix. The vermiform appendix is about 6 cm to 10 cm in length, and it is placed retrocolically. That means it is behind the colic region. Another thing we can observe is that it lies approximately the entirety of it lies inside the pelvic region. So it is a blind tube. That means it does not really have an opening right here. That also means that this other end, is specifically quite different from this region. So the difference here is mostly seen internally by the presence of something known as the luminal orifice. So the luminal orifice has a mucosal plug in it that acts as a valve. So that being said, the entire thing also is made up of something known as, if you look at the outer covering of this appendical region of the vermiform appendix, you can notice that there are the teneas and we know the teneas are muscular they're made up of muscles, smooth muscle cells. So the lateral tinea, the medial tinea, and the other tinea, they come together to form the outer muscular covering of this entire structure. The organ that is in close association with the entire structure, with the vermiform appendix, is also known as the tube, the right uterine tube, along with the right ovary. So these are the two structures that are in close association. So this is the mucosa. So this is the mucosa of the entire structure, and the mucosa is made up of, just like any other organ, the serosa, the muscularis externa, the submucosa, and lastly the mucosa. So the serosa is not a continuous layer. It is obstructed at certain regions by the attachment of the mesentery. And near this attachment of the mesentery, we do not really have any serosa near this. The next thing, so that's basically the mesenteric attachment. The next thing that we're going to notice is that in the submucosa, we can find certain types of cells known as the M cells. And M cells, we know that whenever there's a presence of M cells, there is the presence of something known as the lymph vessels. So we have the lymph vessels right there, and we know that the M cells are very associated with the lymphatic tissues and the lymphocyte and antigenic response. So that's the lymph right there, the lymph nodes and the lymph tissues. And then we can also find a specific type of antigen known as the B type of antigen, which is associated with the submucosa. So now let us look at the cecum. The cecum is 6 centimeters long, and we can say that anteriorly the cecum is covered by the peritoneum, completely by the peritoneum. So, due to the presence of the peritoneum, we can say that there are a lot of peritoneal recesses. So, we have a lot of peritoneal recesses, and namely the peritoneal recesses are the superior and the so the first type is the superior and the inferior ileocecal recess. Then we have the retrocecal recess, and lastly the paracolic type of recess. And it's also important to know that the retrocecal recess has the vermiform appendix. Another thing to know is that due to the presence of these type of recesses, there's a strong formation. There's this induction of the formation of hernias, of internal intestinal hernias. So hernias are formed in these recesses, and so the hepatic flexure. So that right there is the hepatic flexure. And the hepatic flexure is in close association with a lot of organs. Now, the first thing that you have to consider is that it's not, if you look here, you can see that it's not as deep as compared to the other flexure right here. This is the splenic flexure. So the hepatic flexure is not as deep as the splenic flexure, and it is not really covered with the peritoneum. All the other parts are covered by the peritoneum, but the hepatic flexure is only connected to the posterior abdominal wall with the help of a short mesentery. Now, another thing that one can notice here is that it's in contact with a lot of organs. So we have posterolaterally, we have the kidney, the right kidney, the superior surface of the right kidney, and then we have the inferior portion of the right lobe of the liver. That being said, on the medial side, so that was posterolateral side, on the medial side, we have the second part of the duodenum, and then we have the gallbladder. So there's not much to say about this except the fact that there are certain organs in vicinity and the connection to the posterior abdominal wall. So that is the transverse abdominis muscle that posteriorly, if you can see posteriorly, just a second. So if you're going to look at this entire structure posteriorly, let's rotate the structure posteriorly, we can notice that there is something, the quadratus lumborum. So quadratus lumborum is this one, this muscle right here. The small muscle right here is known as quadratus lumborum. And then we also have the transverse, behind the transverse abdominis muscle. And then internally, as you can see here, this one is known as the right psoas major muscle. So right psoas major, thoracis lumborum, and transverse abdominal, quadratus lumborum and the transverse abdominis muscle are the major muscles that make up this entire structure. Now, other thing that we can notice is this small muscle right here, which is not quite in close relationship, but which is this muscle right here. That's the psoas minor muscle there. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look. What are the muscles and the structures that are in close proximity of the ascending colon? So that is the ascending colon right there, and you can see that we have the anterior abdominal wall and the transverse abdominis muscle. So the muscle that you can see in the ascending colon is the transverse abdominis. Then we have something known as the ileocholic junction. Now, there's not much to say about the ileocholic junction except the fact that the ileocholic junction is where there is the formation. There is the junction of the ileum of the small intestinal, the small intestinal tract to the the cecum of the large intestine. And this is where the food just goes into and reaches the from the small intestine to the large intestine. Next thing we can observe is the fact that the opening of the ileum, the ileocolic junction is guarded by something known as labial folds. And these two labial folds are very apparent in the internal part of the ileocolic junction. And this is basically the relation of the cecum with, there are no organs actually, there's just two muscles. So we have the first muscle known as the lacus muscle right there. So that's the lacus. And then we have the other muscle, the psoas major muscles, especially the right psoas and the lacus. And also we have to keep in mind that we have the quadrangular anterior abdominal wall, which is not really shown here, but the anterior abdominal wall is also the relation of the cecum, the anterolation of the cecum.